This podcast is brought to you by Infrastructure Masons, uniting builders for the digital future. Looking to turn your innovative idea into the next big thing in digital infrastructure? The iMasons Incubator is here to help you connect with industry leaders, spark awareness, and accelerate your path to success. If your concept can help drive a more sustainable digital future, we want to hear from you. Don't miss this chance to grow, give back, and shape the digital landscape. Email us today at innovation@imasons.org to find out how the iMasons Incubator can help bring your idea to the world.
Welcome to the world of data center innovation with the iMasons podcast, discovering the people leading our industrial revolution. My name is Romain Tranchon, and today I'm joined by John Cowan, the founder of Next Wave Partners, a venture studio and investment fund redefining early stage capital through founder-aligned financing structures. He is the author of Venture Capital 2.0, a widely circulated critique of the legacy VC model and a blueprint for building startups in the post-power law era. NextWave developed the SAFER, a hybrid investment instrument that prioritizes revenue-based returns and long-term alignment, offering founders capital without control loss and investors access to a perpetual fund unconstrained by traditional VC timelines. Let's get right into it. Hey John, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Roman. How are you?
Yeah, very good. It's nice to have you on a podcast today. It's a bit of a departing topic. We generally talk about very technical things, very on the ground, physical instruments that goes in the makeup of data centers. And today we're going to talk about something that's further afield, something that enables all of that to happen. So we're going to talk about venture capitalists and how the funding goes into the infrastructure. I'm really looking forward to it because this is so different to everything we've done so far. But before we go there, do you mind, for the listeners that may not know you already, present yourself, your background, and what Next Wave Partners is about?
Sure. Yeah. No. Absolutely. And by the way, I mean, I think these conversations are inextricably linked, both capital and the bits and bytes of the infrastructure that kind of goes into a lot of these technical conversations. They're kind of like peanut butter and jelly. They have to go together. And so we're super excited to talk about this with you today. I think it's a topic that requires, a lot of coverage and a lot of analysis and discussion in our industry. But by way of background, I've spent the last almost 25 years building early stage companies. I've never really worked for a large enterprise organization unless through M&A or joint venture or what have you. I've spent a career building infrastructure technology companies. I started in telecommunications in the mid to late 1990s and branched into software eventually. Through the journeys of paradigm development like cloud computing and those kinds of things. And, as part of that process of building early stage companies, I got a front row seat, a real education, if you will, in the relationship between early stage innovation and development and capital. I'm very fond of saying that I wouldn't be where I am in my career without venture capital. That is a fact. Without speculative investors, backing the ideas that I was involved in, nothing would have been able to come from it. But by the same token, and this is kind of a weird dynamic, I wouldn't be here today on this podcast with you because of venture capital. And it's a very interesting statement to make because it sort of encapsulates the double-edged blade, if you will, that is venture capital, the relationship between founders and innovators and the groups that underwrite that innovation, that finance that innovation. And, when my business partner, James Tomlinson, and I finished our last startup, which was squarely focused on the kind of infrastructure that we're going to talk about today, we decided that it was time for us to, reimagine or redefine the relationship between innovation and capital, particularly as we are embarking on what I would consider to be the most significant generational technology shift in 100 years. We just felt that now was the time to do that. And so Next Wave Partners was born from the concept of marrying innovation in capital with the necessity of building a thesis squarely around the infrastructure that will be required to deliver all of these things that we like to talk about and read about vis-a-vis autonomy. Our autonomous future, or what Next Wave calls the era of autonomous systems.
Thank you, John, for this this thorough introduction, because it's got so many different aspects to it. So let's try and break that down into smaller components.
Sure.
You've talked about digital infrastructure, the underpinning layer of all the rest of the innovations that people can feel in touch. And in general, we talk about AI, but you've talked about mobility and autonomous mobility. Can you put a definition on what you understand by digital infrastructure, or at least the infrastructure elements that you would be touching?
Well, I would classify it as a stack of technologies that ultimately enable a fully autonomous machine-to-machine economy, right? A machine-to-machine communications, commerce, data handoff, intelligence. All of those sort of elements are the building blocks for, again, this era, this next 30 to 50 years of societal improvement that will be driven by machines, interacting with other machines.
It's quite clear that you see infrastructure as a key component to progress, and without it wouldn't really work, if you want. So why do you think that is? Can you take us through the relationship between the infrastructure elements that maybe people take for granted and the things that they don't see versus the innovations that people can see in their day-to-day lives? What's the link between the two?
Well, I mean, the link is it's almost like plumbing. You can almost think of it like the way we would think of plumbing in our homes, right? I mean, we take for granted exactly how that system works, and we use plumbing every day in our homes. And don't think for a second exactly about the intricacies that are required to make that system work. I would say the same thing even about electricity. We just take for granted our use of electricity in our homes and businesses. Often, really not even requiring to know exactly how that system works and delivers that to our homes and offices. The underlying infrastructure for autonomy is very similar. But what's really unique about this is that unlike existing sort of commoditized technologies like plumbing and electricity, the West, I'll call it the Western world, is in an arms race, if you will, to compete with very, very aggressive economies like those in China and what have you, that see the same things that we all see and are racing in their own way to create the center of gravity for this machine-to-machine economy, in their territory, in their land. That's what makes things really unique. And so my own experience with this, my own like sort of live touch with the infrastructure side of this came from trying to build a software company, a platform that could facilitate machine-to-machine exchange and communication and commerce at what we back in the day, what we called the edge, right? I think we still call it that. I still call it that. We, James and I built that software company. James Thomas and I built that software company, thinking full well that the existing carriers, the existing cloud operators, the existing data center companies were taking care of the necessary infrastructure. We assumed that it was there, that they're taking care of it. And certainly, if you go to any conference in the data center industry or the cloud computing industry, and you look at the marketing content, you would think that all of this advanced infrastructure is in place. And so we built like with that mindset, and only to realize when we went out to kind of deploy our own platform that in fact this infrastructure did not exist. The concepts of ultra low latency last mile wireless networks, carrier neutral fiber, advanced sensor fusion technologies, LiDAR, camera, radar, acoustic. These things, are talked about in vacuums, and they exist in certain lab type of environments, but there was nothing really out there in the world for us to actually utilize. And that was a realization for us that, holy smokes, we need to be building infrastructure for the next 20 years before we can really materialize any of the things that we're talking about as an industry at scale. You want self-driving cars, you want drone deliveries, you want zero traffic fatalities, you want advanced pedestrian safety and what have you in your urban environments. We are a long way away from that. That was our real wake up call in realizing that we had to go and crack the infrastructure problem first.
It's an interesting one because in general terms, when we're talking about investments, we see two major groups, and I'm not inventing it, as you told me that was part of our preparation. So hopefully I got that right. You generally have the Wall Street kind of investments that goes towards the large, very much more secure firms traded on the upper market. And then you have the Silicon Valley type of investment that goes towards the quite small startups, but with a huge potential for upside. And as you and I discussed, it leaves a big gap for that infrastructure investment, which is neither large and a commodity traded asset or something with a huge potential to go up. But if that infrastructure is not there, then none of the other two can exist, right? Can you take me through where that fits in and how that works?
Yeah. So when we realized, of course, that figuring out how to take on this infrastructure problem was something that we just had to do. We went sort of back to the drawing board, so to speak, to try and figure out why is this an issue? Like why do we have such a gap between the required infrastructure and where we are today, and why we seemingly all know that we require this kind of infrastructure, this plumbing, if you will, for this future. And when I went away and thought about it, I came back with a theory called America's Innovation Paradox, which I wrote about and published. I call it a paradox because there's never a single meeting or a conversation I have with anybody in our industry that disagrees that we do not require this infrastructure, that autonomy is not the future. Everybody around the table always nods, yes, 100%. This is where we're going as a society. This is how we're competing with the likes of China, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yet we would leave these meetings and not a lot happens. Like we sort of seem perilously stuck in neutral, almost incapable of executing. And that's the paradox, right? And so when you think about it, really trying to explain the paradox, you look at all aspects of why that is, and to me, it's not ingenuity, it's not entrepreneurship, it's not innovation, it's not the availability of capital itself. All of those things, we even now have government regulation that supports this. Those aren't issues. Like none of those things are blockers, particularly in the United States, where you have just such an amazing aggregation of wealth and opportunity and regulatory support. It had to be something else. And what I concluded was that the issue wasn't capital itself. The issue was the thesis of capital. And when I started to look at the problem from that perspective, it made a lot of sense, because if you spend a lot of time on, with Wall Street style investors, the kind of investors that underwrite data centers on a regular basis, they have a very specific thesis of investing that is not build it and they will come. It is build it when they come, which means that the risk profile for that subsection of the market, which is a big section of the market in terms of a capital perspective, is looking for completely de-risked investments. I'll give you the capital to build your data center. You give me the IRUs or the pre-sales or what have you. that effectively take all the risk out of my investment. It's a very similar model to other real estate plays, whether you want to build a condo complex or an industrial strip mall or what have you. The parameters are very real estate like, and that's incompatible with what we're talking about here. I can't give you guaranteed IRUs or pre-booked revenue or what have you. Like, this future is literally inventing itself on a week-to-week basis in some categories of technology. And so that's a fundamental disconnect, right? So we have lots of conversations with, I'll say hundreds of billions of dollars that want to be involved, but the response is, give us a call when you're a little further down the path. And that's a chicken and egg problem, right? And then you fly across the country into Silicon Valley, and you have a different sort of dynamic, a different problem, and that problem is, an industry in finance, venture capital as an asset class has become, I would say, hopelessly dependent on the software multiple, right? The unicorn multiple that drives the entire thesis of investing. So if what you're talking about isn't a scale out software play where the VC themselves can see 100+X return, through the mechanisms that they have at their disposal, like marketing and FOMO and all these kinds of things, as we're witnessing in the software AI industry today, infrastructure is just not really compatible, right? I mean, we're talking about 30-year investment models for infrastructure. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine a VC showing up to a pitch meeting for somebody who said they wanted to build, asphalt roads across the country? I mean, come on. I mean, that's not going to fly. They're not in that business. Yeah. They're in a different investing thesis altogether. And those are really the two big sort of sources of capital that innovators have traditionally had to rely on. And that's what I think is the issue. Is it's an incompatibility with the thesis of investing that's going to hold us back in trying to proliferate the kind of infrastructure that drives autonomy.
That's certainly very interesting to see those investors turn away, and for good reasons. I mean, they've been given money to invest on certain parameters, certain returns. So if not them, then who? Who's the right investor?
So the right investor is an investor that understands that we are looking at this problem from what we call a long arc of innovation, right? Next Wave as researchers have chronicled innovation over long arcs, and we can very clearly observe 5 distinct arcs of innovation. These are transformations in society that last anywhere from 50 to 60 years in time, and there have been 5 distinct arcs of innovation that have transformed our world and our society. And we at Next Wave believes that autonomy is the 6th arc, right? It's the 6th wave of innovation, and building an investment thesis around that requires to think in those kinds of terms. I can't think in terms of a 3-year horizon where I can drive up the valuation of a software company and flip it on the market and create return. By the same token, I also can't think about this from a pure wash, rinse, repeat real estate play, because a lot of the technology is still very immature, right? And it's field testing in autonomy. And so it starts with structuring investment companies that are capable of thinking in those terms. And there are Next Wave and a small cohort of alternative funds are emerging to try and tackle that, to create the kind of capital structure that can take a long-term position, obviously still focused on returns for investors, but aren't sort of hampered by fixed fund life cycles and the need to be extractive about their capital position, right? Pulling value out of businesses or prematurely selling them, exiting, what have you. So that, I think it starts with that. I mean, we've tried to set up Next Wave in a way that facilitates that, right? That can onboard capital into infrastructure projects and not be hampered by, again, the traditional restrictions of Wall Street and Silicon Valley.
It seems to me that if somebody's going to invest over a longer time period, and we're talking about 30 years until that infrastructure is fully utilized, and somebody's made use of that infrastructure in place, it strikes me that you've got to get it right. You've got to build the right type of infrastructure for whatever we're envisaging, the use cases to be in the future. How do you know you get it right?
I think you get it right by assuming you're going to get it wrong. And what I mean by that is, and this is where the traditional venture building, entrepreneurship really plays an important role in this. It would be impossible for anybody like me or anybody else on your podcast to show up and say, I can tell you exactly what the necessary tech stack is going to be, the infrastructure stack needs to be in order to facilitate all of this forever and ever. Amen. It is, it's really impossible to make that statement, but it is possible to recognize what the building blocks are and to architect the kinds of companies that can future-proof that, right? That can evolve as, technologies evolve, that can, upgrade and retrofit and continue to scale out. And so, along those lines, we think about the underlying infrastructure as having, certain categories. Like forget about for a minute that the actual infrastructure brands or tech that gets deployed. You can think about this from a grouping of technologies perspective in the stack, right? Things like, the actual physical sitting of infrastructure, the pole or the mount or what have you, the actual, what I would call the data center of the far edge. That is a source of innovation, a piece of innovation. How we go about building fiber and network backhaul, that's a distinct category. The actual compute at the far edge, at the edge computing hardware that needs to exist, in close proximity to where machines are creating data, and of course the wireless connectivity, the radios, the small cells, the V2X radios, the next G, I'll call it next G. It's not necessarily 5G, but those wireless standards that are evolving to enable ultra low latency networking. Those components are a source. And of course, if we're going to build autonomy, anything, we have to be thinking about position, navigation, and timing. We need to be thinking about micro positioning and navigation and timing. We have to, what goes beyond, GPS, from a general positioning technology. And then, of course, this world is enabled by sensors, right? So, obviously, today, we're thinking about things like radar and LiDAR and cameras and environmental sensors, but, that's a roadmap itself, right? So if you think about those things from the perspective of a roadmap, you can adjust, you can enhance, you can upgrade, you can do those kinds of things if you have a pipeline. But so starting with the categorization of infrastructure is an important step first.
Yeah. If I look at the breakdown you've just given us, going from autonomy with all the different components that makes in enabling it, not even building autonomy, but enabling somebody else to come on top and build a car, a bus, a plane, a drone, or anything that makes use of it. It sounds to me that Next Wave becomes the one-stop shop for everything you need to have to then, as a platform, to be able to build that on top. Is that the right way to look at it?
You can think of it that way. Like, I wouldn't say one-stop shop. Like, we're not, Next Wave is going to be, aspires to be the underwriter and facilitator, right? The accelerator of this world. What I would say about that, though, is that it's really important in my mind to create a distinct line between infrastructure and solutions. From taking a playbook from our data center era, right? I mean, data centers are physical infrastructure facilities that enable, the internet's solutions to co-locate, house, and actually deliver to their end user customers. We're thinking about autonomous infrastructure the same way. The tech stack that I just described that we're getting involved in underwriting are going to help enable and accelerate, autonomous and connected mobility solutions, intelligent transportation systems, public safety and situational awareness solutions, industrial and logistics autonomy, those kinds of things, and all of the things that I hate the term smart city. I'll call it I'll call it something. I'll call it intelligent urban centers. But if you think about environmental monitoring and energy efficiency and the concepts of active digital twins, those kinds of things in urban environments, those are solutions that can be developed rapidly if the underlying infrastructure was there for them to build on.
There's something I'd like to bring you onto, right? So we've seen two things, especially in cities, that you're talking about autonomous mobility. We've also seen the advent of smart cities and a number of councils, towns, and offices trying to create more, I want to say, smarter cities for the benefit of everybody, of course, but that is suddenly a centralized model that is trying to be deployed in the same, let's say, geography that you're trying to deploy a decentralized model. Okay, I'd like you to unpick a couple of things for me. One is, how do we avoid actually, or how do we make sure that the infrastructure is suitable for not just one use case, but multiple use cases? So that would be the first part. But also, how do we avoid fully duplicating the entire infrastructure when the investment models are coming from two different ways?
Yeah, those are important topics. So I will say that on the first topic, the concept of I'll call it governance, nonprofit governance, okay, around tech standards and what have you for autonomy, that needs to exist. Right, there needs to be a neutral ombudsman, if you will, in between all of the different technology vendors, the community, public sector stakeholders, the private real estate operators. Almost like I'll call it like an IEEE for autonomy, right? Should really exist, as we continue to evolve down this path. But when it comes to you bring up a really important point about the idea of creating sort of closed, centralized solutions. And we've seen that it's very typical in product evolution, where you have these, closed standalone solutions that exist that eventually give way to, a utility or a commodity style rollout. And, from my perspective, the path to that, the path to ubiquity for intelligent infrastructure is in all of these stakeholders realizing the law of data gravity and understanding how to harness it, right? So data gravity, which is an original theory written by a friend of mine, Dave McCrory, a long time ago, was a theory he wrote to explain the economic phenomenon of internet platforms like Salesforce, right? Like how he classified it as data gravity because he could see how the existence of data created a gravitational pull for apps and services. So the greater the mass, like the greater the mass that could create the gravitational pull, the more apps and services were drawn in. And when you draw in apps and services, you create economy. And when you create economy, you create prosperity. This is literally the story of the platform era on the internet. I see data gravity applied at the community, at the street level, the far edge of the network, in the sense that where data is created, where machines are creating data, you will create the same gravitational pull. And that gravitational pull of apps and services and solutions and all those kinds of things, that's all you really want to enable. You don't want to be, if you're a city, you should not be in the business of providing, independent software solutions and cloud platforms and these kinds of things. You should provide the basic building blocks to attract it all. And when you can do that, you create economy. And when you create economy, you create prosperity. And that's both for, urban stakeholders as well as private companies, right? Whether you're talking about the future tax base of a geography, or you're talking about the prosperity of, technology companies that are developing and scaling and what have you, data gravity plays an extremely important role. So I think if we take the perspective of simply trying to enable that, it'll be the first big step, I think, for cities and utilities and regional operators that have part of these building blocks in place.
Well, I'd like to bring you to something, right? So the iMasons is really uniting the builders of the digital age. I think this is one of the first podcasts where really we're talking about the digital age at large. That said, many of our members are actually coming from the data center world and data center community. I'd love to have your take around, like, how can the data center industry or data center operators can position themselves not just as a cost center, but maybe as a key enabler, either to attract new forms of capital or maybe to enable new forms of usages for their services.
But it's a really fascinating convergence on multiple levels. So, I mean, obviously, I was in the room, so to speak, when when Dean and Co created the iMasons and was an early supporter of the project in its very, very gestational phases. So I've had a front row seat to watch iMasons sort of evolve as an outsider looking in, which is kind of fascinating to come back around to talking about how iMasons can be the ecosystem of the foundation for all of the things that we're talking about. It can be an extremely important stakeholder, because I've never viewed, although again, it's data center and data center infrastructure that is the genesis of iMasons, I never really saw iMasons as limited by that. In fact, what I would say is that the existence of autonomous infrastructure is directly related to the future longevity, profitability, and scalability of the data center world. Where does all this data ultimately go? How is traffic ultimately backhauled across the country? These are topics that are very germane to the data center industry, and I think the things that we've talked about are extremely important to their own future. And so therefore, I mean, I never, maybe it's just I mistakenly look at iMasons, a different way or something, but I've never viewed the organization as limited to, the four walls and a roof called a data center. I've viewed it as all of the related infrastructure required for, our digital future, broadly speaking.
Yeah, I mean, all the new partners and members that are coming now to iMasons have been definitely much further from much further away than those four walls and that proverbial roof that you're mentioning. What I'd like to discuss though is, as data centers are evolving, the infrastructure needs to evolve with it, and I'm wondering if you have a view onto what are the most underserved part of the infrastructure that potentially would do well with a bit of evolution, or even like brand new deployment of pieces of infrastructure that you've seen could benefit the data center infrastructure itself.
Well, I mean, there's two layers to that conversation. There is like the physical technology, obviously, but there is also the economy that's forming around it, right? And I think the data center industry itself and all of the stakeholders involved should be paying very close attention to that. And this is ironically, going back to the iMasons, is where I think there can be a really fascinating role to play, right? So if this future is going to exist, it's going to require three sort of stakeholders. And if you're in your mind's eye, if you can picture like the classic concentric circle, you have innovation on one end, which is like all of the really, really smart people that are inside the data center community and in the iMasons community that are thinking about different ways to, whether it's power infrastructure, network infrastructure, compute infrastructure, all of those kinds of dynamics. They're thinking about these things. And so whether you're thinking about them in terms of a hyperscale data center and trying to microsize them for the far edge of the network, there's a continuity of thinking there amongst the innovators. You also have the technologies themselves, right? That have to be developed and scoped and refined and tested and what have you. So you've got a technology layer, and then you have the capital layer. And this is where, whether it's groups like NextWave or it's balance sheets from large data center operators, right, that come together to help build and finance this future. These three things working together is what I see as the emerging ecosystem. And what, to me, like, what better group to capture it than iMasons? Because again, rightly or wrongly, I see that as the reason for iMasons to exist.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we definitely hear a lot of that in the different groups that are meeting face to face in the number of number of events that we put together. So
Put another way, it's the enterprise data centers, the human being, the intelligence, the smart people in the ecosystem, and then the capital, right?
Yeah.
You put those three things together, and I'm willing to bet that it would be an interesting result of a scientific experiment, right? It would be very interesting to see what happens when those particles collide.
So I think that brings me to my next question, because if all of this is happening, we've been talking about the data center infrastructure as pretty safe and risk adverse. That would mean that not only do they need to get in the room, there is a mind shift that needs to operate, so that they start really thinking differently around what they need and what needs to happen for the next, as I said, set of innovations to happen. Take me through that mind shift. Maybe this is something you've gone through and you've taken other people through, but like what sort of questions do they need to ask themselves? What sort of things do they need to look at differently? What data points should they need to start looking at through investments, for example? Take me through that. How does that work?
Well, this is really sort of germane to thesis building, right? And every enterprise, every data center operator, every hyperscaler has their own specific long-term objectives. Thinking about this in 5-10 year chunks, not next quarter's revenue numbers. This is long horizon planning. How do we see ourselves in the next 5 to 10 years? As an operating company, where are we generating the greatest amount of revenue and profit from? How do we insulate ourselves from competitive threats and what have you? That itself is the map, or the thesis of an enterprise focus on this sector of autonomy. Assuming that we have that, you have this idea of what you want to be when you grow up, so to speak. You can then start to lay the building blocks. And our advice working with the larger corporates is always crawl, walk, run. Like do whatever you do not jump into venture capital. Do not get, because this is a different universe, it's a different world. Start small and think of it like experiments. All right, you will probably try and fail several times before you find the right model and system that works, not just from a pure operational standpoint, but from a plug into your future that you see perspective.
Yeah. I mean, you and I were talking about the timeline of 3 years to get it right? And you were saying next wave is on the edge of that 3 years to actually getting a lot of things right at the moment.
I said to my business partner James, when we got out of the when software and infrastructure as startup builder, it's heavy. It is such a heavy lift to achieve product market fit, and I've never ever done it from innovation, from when you invent something that doesn't exist in the world, and you try to go from invention to any kind of adoption in the world. It's extremely difficult process, and the more technical and abstract it is, the harder it becomes. And so, having done that for over 25 years, and been a part of it for over 25 years, I said to my business partner James, when we moved into Next Wave, that we're going to finally break the 3-year arc. And the 3-year arc is I've never been able to do that in under 3 years. It seems like for whatever reason, the universe says 3 years, and I understand why. It's because the ideas have to be refined and tested, and you're never 100% right with the first thing you jot down on a piece of paper, or the first patent you file is never going to be the ultimate deployed use case in the market. But I said we're focused heavy on finance, and so that's going to go really fast. And 3 years into it, exactly 3 years into it, Next Wave hit its inflection point 3 years into the journey.
Yeah.
I was thinking about building that into a pamphlet for spouses of entrepreneurs. Know what you're getting into. Okay, whatever this guy or girl is getting into is it's going to be a journey, and there's just it's almost impossible to create shortcuts or hacks or this kind of things.
Yeah, to be honest, I wish the journey was less like a roller coaster, but we'll take it as it is.
Oh yeah, it's not like it's a linear thing, right? It
It's
is.
not.
It's a lot of
It
highs. It's a
just
lot
isn't.
of lows. It's a lot of failed attempts at certain things before you kind of figure out how to get it right.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Look, I'd like to pick your brain one last time, right? So we've talked about what's coming up and generally how to invest, but what does the future look like? If you could have, pick a drawer, anything you wanted in terms of infrastructure to be put in place, what's that layer look like in 10 years time, 20 years time? What do you want to have in place to see that the next layer of innovation come through?
Fast forwarding that far into the future, I would say, at the point in time where we realize that the real estate is the platform, right? It is the canvas on which we can deploy all of this infrastructure and create, a national scale, contiguous, intelligent infrastructure network like we built the internet, with localized ownership, where communities and individual investors off the street are ultimately the beneficiaries of this economy that forms on top.
That's amazing. Look, I think we're going to stop on that note. What a great way to end on this. John, I can't thank you enough for coming and talking through this. I would advise anybody to go and look for John's book as well, on which I believe can be found on Amazon. Book called Venture Capital 2.0. Yeah, fantastic.
Shameless plug for you.
There you go. That was not a planned plug, but I'll do it anyway.
I just happened to have a copy on the desk. I'm sorry.
There you go. So, but yeah, very interesting topic. Very much further afield, as I said in the introduction. I wanted to do a couple more things. So, for those of you as our listeners who want to know more about John's venture, you can go to nextwave.partners. So that would be nextwave.partners, and find a lot more information about what John's up to. And if you have more questions, like I do, and I'm pretty sure we'll be talking again, John, you can reach to John at nextwave.partners. And so all of that should enable you to reach out to him. The discussion never stops. For those of you who wants to continue, maybe do not know iMasons yet, you can go to imasons.org, where you'll find all of our committees, meetings, events, and collaterals. And then also, for those of you who are members already, please feel free to go to imasons.mobilize.io, where we have a vibrant community continually talking about not just innovations, but all of the other pillars around sustainability, people, education, and so on. So on that note, John, again, thank you very much for your time, and I'm pretty sure I'll see you around soon.
Thank you for having me, and I'm sure that we will see each other soon.
Absolutely. Take care.
Infrastructure Masons is a global, non-profit, professional association of individuals connected and empowered to build a greater digital future for all. If you too want access to networking events, forums, and summits that foster innovation and influence, register now and join the other 6,000 committed participants at imasons.org/membership application.